Today we have Sophia Meeres, who is from UCD Landscape Architecture, same school as me, talking about trees outside the forest. So this is a strategic priority project. The idea is it brings together people across disciplines that mightn't ordinarily work together, perhaps promote interdisciplinary networking on a project, and perhaps seeding it as a project that can scale up in the future. So the wider team is Ciaran Bennett from Estates, and Kieran Beattie from Estates, Gerald Mills from Geography, Tine Ningal from Geography, Brian Tobin from Forestry and Agriculture, and Sophia Meeres, sorry. After a few years, I should really get it right this stage. So I will hand over to you, Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very nice to see you here. Thank you for coming. And also thank you very much, Will and Katrina and Owen and Taz, everyone at the Earth Institute, for the help and assistance and encouragement you've given me and our group in the last sort of year. So I only joined the UCD Earth Institute formally last year, and I gave a little talk in February when we started talking about trees and the notion of planning for trees outside the forest. And as a result of those conversations, it sort of became clear that there was a lot of people across the university that got in touch, that wanted to talk about these things, but from very, very, very different backgrounds. And it struck us too, is that, oh, trees as a theme is like goes across all the themes within the UCD Earth Institute. So then we thought, oh, maybe we could have it as a strategic priority, and we're everywhere. Because in all of the work I've done with trees, and this is what I was talking about in February, is working on policy documents with local authorities. Trees are everywhere, but they're the focus of no one. Often not true, I have to say, correct myself immediately, not true in the Dublin city councils where they've got tree officers who are very aware of trees, but in the local authorities where I was working, it was really very hard. There's trees everywhere, but nobody really cares for them as they should, or doesn't know very, very much about them. So, yes. So the focus on trees. So yeah, why trees outside the forest? That's a question which I think is important to address. There's a strategy, there's a national strategy for forest trees. We know what we've got. We know where our forests are. We know we've got, I think it's 11.6% of forest in the country now. We know all of these things. And yet we don't have a baseline data for trees outside the forest. We know almost nothing about our trees outside the forest. So that's trees in parks, trees in streets, urban trees, trees in gardens, trees in farmland, trees in hedgerows. We have absolutely no baseline data. So that's why we started thinking about trees outside the forest, because we know so little about them. So the National Forest Strategy, there's lots and lots of funding for planting new forests. There's even a word, there's a noun, afforestation, for planting new forests, but there's no word in the English language for planting trees outside the forest. There should be a special word for that. Yeah, so we felt that except at a very local level where there are local city authorities with tree officers and experts who are working on a very local level, there's no national policy or real understanding or knowledge of our trees outside the forest. So then the other thing is, we were looking at the UCD campus, and I'm a landscape architect, so I teach outside, walk around a lot in all sorts of weather, and it's a wonderful thing to be doing. And it struck us, the UCD campus, it's like a small town. Actually, not such a small town. It's like a rather large town. So all the sorts of issues and problems we came across in our rural town work, these are the same problems that we have here when it comes to planning for trees. So planning for trees in the campus affected by all the same issues as in a town. So we thought, oh, perhaps we could put together a proposal for the seed funding, which was our second UCD Campus Trees initiative. And we were lucky enough to get that over the summer. So we had a busy summer. We're very lucky, and we were delighted to get both of those projects. And the two of them are interlinked and running in parallel and not really separable. But mostly today I'm talking about our first one, the trees outside the forest. This picture, by the way, yeah, I struggled actually for a long time because, let's say trees are good for us. They're good for the planet. I'm just going to move on to the next. this picture's taken as part of the UCD Belfield boundary. So my struggle was, do I show them loads of gorgeous pictures of trees? It's really hard to take ugly pictures of trees. And I've got hundreds of pictures of trees and everyone is more beautiful than the other. And it's like, yeah, how do we get people emotionally involved with trees? We show them beautiful trees on the campus and maybe they'll notice them. But I think you will notice them anyway, because if you've come, you're already interested in trees. But this is I don't know if this photograph is beautiful, and I always want to say trees are beautiful, they're good for the planet, they're good for us, they make us happy, they're good for our health, they're good for biodiversity. I like this picture also because you can't separate, I don't know if Thomas Cummins is here, so he does this lovely class with my students, but you can't separate trees from soil, from water, and yet we separate those three things. And in this little photograph here, you understand that the ground that the tree is rooted in is part of the tree itself. So soil, water, and trees, it's all part of the one thing. And this photograph is actually a really interesting photograph. It's part of the UCD Belfield boundary, so you might say it's one of the heritage woodland walks. This little stream could be very beautiful. It's actually rather dirty, and we can see it's running towards the end there where it runs under a culvert. So it's much of this little stream is piped and then it reappears elsewhere. So there's this really interesting interlinking between trees, soil, water, and the campus, and all the things that we've done to the campus and the levels of everything that we have changed. So the other thing, trees, yes, they're the biggest growing and longest living organisms on the planet. That's a really important thing to know. So when you think about planting for trees or growing trees, you don't plant a tree and wait 20 years. You plant a tree, and if you're lucky, it'll be there 200, 300 years time, 400 years. So to make a forest, you need hundreds of years. And there are many trees on this campus which are perhaps 150, 200 years old. It's quite hard to tell how old they are, but there are these wonderful woodland boundaries and borders. They won't be here forever. And it was one of the things that we were thinking is like, what's the plan for the future? And is there an overview of the trees and the campus and what we want? So this is one of the projects that we were interested in. Now, I also have to say that we really think that although I'm talking about trees outside the forest deliberately, in the end, ultimately, a sustainable forest strategy would be a sustainable trees and woodland strategy. And you wouldn't make the difference because our forest strategies would be highly sustainable. And here, so to kick off our project, we went to Clora Woodland in Wicklow. It is actually a commercial forest, but it's also a truly sustainable forest that's showing the way in Europe. So thanks to Ted and Liam and Pro Silva and the owners of this forest, because it's a self-sustaining forest. So it's one of the forests which is showing us, and it's showing us, we're not doing it, it's showing the foresters how it can transform itself into a more beautiful, more aesthetic, more biodiverse and self-sustaining woodland. So this, occasionally trees are cut here, but there's no planting done. So there's oak seedlings, there's all sorts of things coming in from the hedgerows. So this forest is looking after itself. So that's very interesting. So that's how we kicked off. Core team, sorry, they're not all here today. Gerald Mills, Tine Ningal, Brian Tobin, who's been helping me measuring trees around campus. So we wanted to start off by looking at some of the heritage trees and some of the tree maps that existed. Gavin Wallace, he's left, but he was working with us very briefly on our tree inventory. So he's a master's from geography and he did some brilliant work. And thanks to him, we have about 2,000 trees now in our database on campus, every one of them measured and identified. Then we have Ciaran Bennett and Ciaran Beattie, who are both from UCD Estates. Ciaran Beattie, who actually left and now he's come back again, I think I'm delighted. So he's 30 years of knowledge of the living campus and how it was developed and grew and changed and what shifted around. So Jenny Devine has joined us. We have two interns, Cosmo and Matthias, who are working with Gavin. And there's me on the left. So really today, we're not telling you about a lot of things that we've done, but we actually have been quite busy. So I am going to show you some of the things that we've done. But it's a shout out, as Owen said, to say, here we are. We've got these two projects. We're I don't really want to say we know exactly what we're going to do. We want you to join our conversation, and that way the conversation changes. And I'm delighted to have the artist representation here today. So you've won another of the UCD Sustainable Funding projects, is that right?
Yes.
So hopefully we'll be working together. So I was thinking, oh, where are we going to find our artists from? And the artists have come. So any one of us will answer emails and we'll be delighted to meet you. And we'll be setting up further meetings, which won't be in the context of this coffee morning, but much more focused to find out. It'd be like, looking at trees from all our different angles. So the objectives, trees outside the forest, which we're actually just going to call trees. We had a whole discussion about what were we. I was a bit worried we'd call it TOT F. So, so it's trees. So our objectives, to become a transdisciplinary hub for trees outside the forest. So UCD is a transdisciplinary hub, but a hub for ideas and exchange and knowledge. It's not a sort of super sophisticated research hub. It could be, but it's also inviting, the transdisciplinary community that we could say students, if you like, but members of the public that come onto the campus and work with us. So the big deal is raising awareness about the roles of trees, the roles, value and future of Ireland's trees outside the forest. So that's a conversation that isn't really happening at the moment, and we think it would be wonderful if we could have it. And in a very sort of local and personal way, how could we raise awareness about the trees on campus is another of our thoughts. So we want to collaborate in transdisciplinary projects on the campus with the idea of the campus as a lab for research and teaching. So all my favorite teaching is walking around, admiring, digging around, diving under trees, investigating things. We want to imagine new ways to use the UCD Woodland campus for learning, leisure and well-being, and there's lots and lots of different projects going on. We know that, so we don't want to invent the wheel. That's why it's really important that we sort of all work together and we're all aware of what one another is doing. And then the one at the bottom there is importantly to support the UCD sustainability seed funding. So now here I want to mention the Interval project. And I also want to mention Anera Gonzalez, her sustainable campus map. So here are two examples of two super interesting projects that are ongoing, kind of not exactly in parallel, partially in parallel. And we have to find ways to feed into one another and add to one another and talk with one another. So we know we have expertise that Interval might like to make use of, and Interval definitely has some expertise that we'd like to make use of. So we're all for sharing our knowledge and helping one another out. So it's an invitation to any kind of academic or discipline or researcher that has an interest in trees. So here we have our map, UCD in trees, thanks to the Blue Sky Tree Map and Gavin Wallace, who developed a little database and spent the last year really identifying these trees around the map. So as I say, we've got about 2,000 of them done. We think there's somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 trees on the campus. We don't know if there are 50,000 trees, but we don't think so. So we've measured 8,000 to 10,000 trees using our aerial mapping. And it's very possible that all the other trees are really tiny trees that have been planted that may not make it to a 400-year-old tree or may be shifted around. There's lots of birch and things like that. Yeah. So one of the things we've done, so we thought it was important. So that's it. We thought it was important that we got the UCD tree survey done quickly. The UCD campus, rather like the rural counties that I was working with, doesn't really have a database. We have a number. We don't really know what we've got. So one of the things we thought we'd start with, we've got our students and our interns and Gavin measuring the trees, but then Brian and I said, oh, we're going to go and identify each of those 20 trees on the woodland walk. And Ciaran Beattie told me, I didn't necessarily choose the biggest and best, but I also chose sometimes the most interesting, and I chose them to encourage people to walk all over the campus. And Ted Wilson said to me, yeah, but it's not always the biggest tree that matters. Sometimes it's a small one or a sustainable one or something that's resisted. So it's very interesting because this is a kind of list of trees, some of which are really big, but not the biggest, some of which are really broad, but not the broadest. And there are also some funny little stumps and a dead tree and one tree that has been removed. So That's very interesting. So the idea of having an interesting map is one for us. Now, this is what I want to say. So comparing the UCD Sustainable Campus Map, so Noah's work with the Interval guys' work, with, so we're really zooming in to the trees. And we think one of the ways is to, it's not just a tree. We know what that tree is. This one is a lime tree, and it's really very interesting because a lot of work was done to protect that tree. So the road goes up into a little bump that you may not notice until you notice it and you realize, oh, they really made a huge effort to kind of build a little bridge to allow that tree to live. But here we are in the heart of the UCD campus. It could be the heart of any town, basically. So it looks like an ultra-urban view, and it's great that we've maintained that tree. Here we are in the central spine with this sort of notion of urban woodland. So I'm talking now about different typologies of tree on the campus. And then we have all of these wonderful UCD parkland trees. These aren't particularly special trees, some of them. They're, they've planted themselves and they've grown really rapidly over the last 60 to 80 years. We might think they're hundreds of years old, but they're just really big, healthy, happy trees. They probably weren't, the sycamores anyway, weren't necessarily planted. And we've got some fantastic specimen trees, this cedar being one of the examples. I see that every day because I'm out there in Newstead. So then it gets very interesting because we sort of thought, we wonder how old this tree is, and can we find it on any of these old maps that we've been looking at? And it is, the OSI map from the 1830s are fantastic, and my students colored them in, and we make these really gorgeous artistic maps that allow us to identify where was the water, where were the trees, where were the woodlands. And this particular species was only brought to England in 1836, I think. So we thought, it's unlikely this was the first tree in Ireland. So maybe it was planted sometime between 1850 and 1880 at a guess. So maybe it's 100, 120, 130 years old. But these trees grow like crazy in this country. So they grow much, much bigger than they would in their native country because it doesn't get cold here in the winter. So all of these sorts of particular details about trees that we think are important for people to know. And we particularly like this tree, as does Brian. So one of Brian's master students has put together a 3D scan. So he's doing these 3D scannings of a number of trees. This is fantastic, this one. But what's really interesting is the base of the tree is flat. So as a landscape architect, I hate it when my students just draw the pavement and there's no roots and no soil underneath the tree. And then sometimes you see in drawings, it's the opposite, like there's an entire tree underneath the pavement. It's not like that either. But actually, the idea of maybe being able to scan the roots of this thing so we can find out what is it really like would be really very interesting. And the other thing we're thinking about, what else could we find out about this tree, about how does it act as an umbrella? What difference does it make to the rainfall, to the ground beneath it? What kind of fauna is in the soil beneath it? How is it rotating the water and the rain around it? So we want to get a sapometer, and we want to measure its blood flow, if you like, to see how it's doing. And how does it do differently in the winter, in the summer, in the night, and in the day? It's very, very interesting. If you cut into a tree in the spring when the sap is rising, it's like you've opened a tap. The sap will gush out. It's amazing. But in the winter, it's much, much quieter. And in the summer, maybe it goes back down again. So we have technical ideas of measuring these things too. So this is one of our favorites. We'd like to put a webcam in the top of this tree as well. So it's the view of the campus from the top of the tree, bird life, all sorts of things might be happening there. That tree may or may not be as interesting as it would be if you put a webcam in one of the big trees in the UCD woodlands where there's lots of wildlife and lots of birds. So you walk down to the woodlands and you hear birds singing. There are creatures around here, but not quite as much. So our deliverables, just so you know, we're working away, by the way. But our deliverables, this transdisciplinary network of expertise in trees outside the forest. So maybe expertise isn't quite the right word, but it is an idea of this hub where we can exchange and learn from one another, actually, and help one another out. We love the idea now. Ellen Rowley and Finola O'Kane made this amazing book, Making Belfield, and we thought, isn't there a missing book, which is to do really with being Belford. It's like the living campus and all the things that changed. So one of the things we want to do in collaboration with UCD Estates and the library is gather together this repository of material that might be as much about the water as it is about the soil, the changes in levels, the underground pipes, the history of these woodlands, trees that were removed, trees that were planted, all sorts of things. The changes in level across this campus were absolutely extraordinary in some places, and that's very hard to tell today. And I haven't really seen any maps that explain that to me. So we might try to find ways of telling this story of change that's taken place over certainly the last 50 years, but of course change took place for hundreds of years before that as well. We love this proposal for an international accreditation of the UCD Campus Arboretum. So rather than a university parkland, we like to think of it as an arboretum with some buildings in it. And that might help us think differently. So that's one of our propositions that we'll be working towards. And of course, Cork has its arboretum, Oxford has its arboretum, a lot of very famous universities have their arboreta and do lots of work in them. So we think it's possible to at least think about it here. So that's one of our proposals. Scoping exercise. So yeah, we've got 18 months to work away on this particular project. And what we would like to do at the end is have this seminar on Ireland's trees outside the forest, where we would gather local authority, people from the DAFM, from agriculture, from forestry. So we would gather together all of those that know, because from my initial understanding, there is a little bit of a gap in knowledge and a gap in policy there. So we could have a very, very interesting time. So we need to prepare this, and we think this may be the chapter on trees in towns and the other chapter, trees in the countryside. And then our one-day seminar, Trees Outside the Forest, culminating with an exhibition of beautiful artistic aesthetic work resulting from various interdisciplinary collaborations that have been inspired by the project. So we hope we'll have a preparatory workshop end of next semester, and then a second one end of the semester following that, and then the seminar, in January or February in the following year.